Welcome to Sessions with Dolly. This is the last part of the proposal writing series. Let's get on it. So before we go into it, let's just recap on what we have discussed so far. So firstly, we had discussed the statement of the problem, and from that we noted that with the statement of the problem, it's where we talk about what we know about the problem, and then from there on you'd have to explain that, okay, this is what we know of the problem, and this is why it's important to know more about the problem, and that is where the justification of the study comes through, where you're justifying your need to know more about the problem. We also discussed research questions. So in the research questions is where now the research is guiding our study. So we are trying to answer a specific question through our research. And then we also talked about the source of data, and here we learned that source of data is where the data is coming from, and not necessarily how you're going to be collecting the data. So today we'll be discussing the analysis methods. So let's get on it. So the analysis method section provides a summary and description of how data will be synthesized to provide insight. So it basically just outlines how you plan to analyze your data to answer your research question. So because you're not really writing the proposal for yourself but for someone else, the section needs to be written in such a way that a reader can then visualize your thought process. Even if they might not know how to analyze data, they should at least get an idea of how the process will be conducted. This will help them understand the insights you will provide from the analysis. So if you'll be analyzing data yourself, this section can really be helpful to you because it allows you to articulate your thoughts and pen them down. This will help you to ensure that you have your I's dotted and your T's crossed. It also ensures that you're limiting errors, and if they are there, you can pick them up easily. So the method section will also be useful to individuals who may want to replicate your analysis as a means of verifying the results. But most importantly, I do believe that this section can build trust with your audience, like the person who's going to be reading your proposal. It shows them that you know what you are doing and that you have a plan, and the plan can be tested and tried. So what exactly is included in the analysis? So let's see what we can include in the analysis section. So in the previous the previous session, we discussed different types of data. As such, it would be important to include how the different types of data will be analyzed and what tools or software you'll be using to analyze the different types. So as you describe these aspects in detail, it will also be important to include the analytical techniques that you will follow for the different types of data. For instance, if you were analyzing quantitative data, you may want to include your calculation of means, medians, or if you are conducting inferential statistics with tests such as your t-test, ANOVA, your chi-square test, or there are also other tests and regression, like if you're running regression models, we have linear regressions, logistic regressions. So those are useful for somebody to actually see what techniques you'll be using to analyze your data, and this can be done with software such as your R software, your Stata, or your SPSS, and many others that are available to analyze quantitative data. However, if you are analyzing qualitative data, you can use methods such as your thematic analysis, content analysis, and there are qualitative software such as NVivo and Atlas TI. So let's also see what else we can include in the analysis methods. So it is important to also include your data preparation steps. So as mentioned, the analysis methods section can also be used by other people who would want to replicate your research. Therefore, detailing data preparation steps is very useful. It helps them to follow your steps well. So here is where you will explain how you will clean and pre-process the data, how you will deal with missing data or outliers, and how maybe you have coded or transformed some of the variables. For instance, in the last session we talked about age being a continuous variable, and sometimes during the analysis process some analysts may prefer to transform the data and group it so that it can provide more insights between the different age groups. So if that happens, you need to have details of the grouping, and so that somebody understands like how a particular variable has been transformed, so that they can also do that or understand it when they're seeing the insight. So here's an example of if you were analyzing quantitative data, what you could include in your analysis method. So essentially with quantitative data, you could have a univariate analysis, and this is where you describe one variable at a time, and this can be done using frequency distributions. Or maybe you can conduct a bivariate analysis, and this is where now you're looking at two variables and you're trying to test the relationship between the two variables through cross tabulations, and maybe you can conduct tests such as your chi-square test and your ANOVA. And then we also have a multivariate analysis, and so this is where now you're focusing on more than two variables at a time. So it involves the analysis of more than two variables at a time. So we've essentially just covered this part of the analysis and this for part of writing a proposal. So in the next episode we'll be discussing now details related to conducting your survey. So you've done all of this preparations, you've written your proposal, and so now you're gonna go out to the field to collect data. So that's what we'll be touching on in the next session, so stay tuned on that.